It's Thursday, October the 8th, 2020, and welcome to BNAP Today. I'm Mike Ryan. Today we catch up with Joe Bourdow and talk franchising, and Kirk Clyatt joins us walking the streets of Philadelphia. Even though the next story is from the US, it applies to businesses worldwide. In America, small businesses struggle to stay afloat as financial relief from Congress stalls. Over 8 million restaurant jobs lost or furloughed. $165 billion lost in restaurant sales. And about 100,000 restaurants are closed due to the effects of the pandemic. More from CNBC.
Forget corporations for a minute. Think Main Street with me. The company you worked for shut down in COVID. You don't get a paycheck or government relief, so you sure don't go to restaurants. Those restaurants close and fire their workers, then they can't spend around town. That's called a small business death spiral. Here's CNBC's Kate Rodgers with one restaurant's dilemma.
Make sure you sanitize the top.
The losses for business owners like San Francisco restaurateur Johnny Matheny are piling up. He already cut his workforce from 80 to 6 across 4 locations and is desperate for financial relief.
I feel betrayed and let down because I keep thinking and believing and knowing we were forced to be shut down by politicians and the government, and for them to decide not to even negotiate to help the country right now, the country of small businesses, which is, I believe, the backbone of the American way.
The numbers are staggering. In the restaurant industry alone, over 8 million workers furloughed or laid off at the height of the pandemic. $165 billion in sales losses from March through July, and 100,000 locations completely closed, according to the National Restaurant Association. A large portion of them expected to become permanent, as the cooler months limit outdoor dining and lawmakers struggle with a stalemate over stimulus spending. And Matheny certainly isn't alone. The National Federation of Independent Business reports that about half of its small business members that received federal aid say they'll need more help in the next 12 months. And what's worse, about 1 in 5 say they'll have to close their doors for good if economic conditions don't improve in the next 6 months. Jeff?
Wow, Kate Rodgers.
Joe Bourdow is a partner with Premier Franchise Advisors and has a 45-year business career that includes significant experience as a successful franchisee and franchisor. Joe served 2 terms on the IFA's board of directors, was chair of the IFA Diversity Institute, a member of the IFA Education Foundation Executive Committee, and was vice chair of the Franchise Relations Task Force. First of all, Joe, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be back with you.
Yep, lovely, beautiful day here, and it looks like a pretty nice day in St. Pete also.
Yep. Still summer here, so it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit today.
Wow,
so. That's
just wonderful. I can hear the barbecue in the background sizzling away. Look, we're now roughly 6 months into the global COVID crisis. Do you know more about how franchised businesses have been affected by this terrible disease?
Well, they have been impacted, no doubt about it. Our timing is good on this because the International Franchise Association and FranData, who is really an authority in this space, published some research results on a webinar last week. That information is available online, but I pulled out a few high points for you because I knew you were going to be asking this question. To set the picture for you, here in the United States, as we headed into 2020, at the beginning of the year, there were 773,600 franchised businesses across the United States. Now, within the first 6 months of COVID, during a time when there was a significant support program from the federal government called PPP, during this time, 32,700 franchise businesses closed. And at this point, 10,875 say they have closed permanently. This has affected 3/4 of all franchise businesses. There's about 25% of them who have not really been impacted due to the nature of the business, that they're in. But 3/4 have been impacted. and only about 25% of those have returned to their normal year-over-year monthly revenue numbers. So this has been a significant impact. Revenues are down totally across franchising $185.3 billion as a result of this. One of the concerning things, an additional concerning thing, and we'll get to some good news later, the Small Business Pulse Survey conducted by the U.S. Census predicts that 1 in 20 small businesses, not just franchises, but all small businesses, 1 in 20 will permanently close as a result of this when all is said and done. And that, if that's true, that would be another 36,000 franchise businesses closing to go along with the 10,875 that have already closed permanently. So that's looks like where the number is going to shake out. We obviously know this is not a happy picture. At this point, Congress in the United States has not been able to get together with the president on another much needed financial support program. That's kind of temporarily dead in the water, at least as of this evening. But who knows? But we still have, rough times to go. We still have impact of COVID hotspots. Now states in the Midwest are seeing some big increases. So just like many other places around the world, we're still very much in this challenging time.
What's the mood out there at the moment? It must be really tough to stay positive.
Yeah, and I think that generally speaking, franchisors and franchisees are kind of a tough lot, and they tend to be optimistic and to try to stay positive. Some good things have happened, as we discussed on some previous calls. As franchisors and franchisees have needed to become creative, they've come up with virtual programs and processes, sometimes new products. There's some really cool things, that have happened that, while they've been not enough to bring things back to normal, they still, I think, bode well for the future when we do come back to normal, because companies may be running more efficiently. They may have created some new products or new ideas that they went ahead and rolled out during this time. And so that's the positive side. And again, most franchisors and franchisees do not have the option of failing, and so they have to do the best they can to survive and thrive during this period.
What about franchise development? Are people still looking at buying into franchised businesses, even with COVID still raging? And it's just it just won't lay down and die, COVID. It's just getting stronger in parts of the world.
Exactly. Interestingly enough, yes. I mean, franchise development is still underway. Most companies are very active, at this point. Interestingly enough, when we looked at the numbers in the first quarter of this year, there were some companies seeing a reduction in leads for prospective franchisees. The brokers were reporting some of that, and the conventional wisdom was that employment was so high in the United States that many people had options of other jobs, and they were less likely to reach out on their own. Obviously, that evaporated pretty quickly as we moved into March and April. And now we're seeing that people who are either still employed or have recently become unemployed are now realizing that maybe they are at a time in their life when it makes sense for them to look at a franchised business as a way to have a little bit more security going forward. They also have, the time to do it now. So companies that are well run in this space are their development departments are very active at this point.
I've heard it said that franchises, and you've mentioned it before, should be awarded, not sold. But do you agree on this, especially in this day and age of COVID?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in any time, and especially now, franchisors really need to take the time to assure themselves that a new franchisee they're bringing in is really going to be a good fit, for their brand. So there needs to be a balance, between the kind of the franchise sales aspect of it all and the franchise approval process. And there really should be a process within a franchisor to balance this out. There needs to be somebody not only selling, but also perhaps themselves or somebody else asking the tough questions of the prospective franchisees. I mean, this needs to be viewed as a marriage. It's a long-term relationship. Many franchisors have a 10-year initial term on a franchise agreement. So these are very difficult to unwind and unpleasant to unwind if either the franchisee makes a bad choice or the franchisor makes a bad choice in awarding the franchise.
How can you tell, though, who's maybe a good fit? Don't all, say, good entrepreneurs make good or great franchisees?
Yeah, you'd think they would. But actually, that's not the case. There's at least a couple of different kinds of entrepreneurs. There are the what I call the flaming entrepreneurs, who are serial entrepreneurs, who are really in it for themselves, by themselves, and really want to do it, their own way. And so sometimes when I was in the approval process with my franchise company, I would run into these people, and you really needed to, they were ready, willing, and able to write the check and sign up today, believe me, because they knew they could do it. They were confident in all of that. But you begin to pick up on the fact that they may become a problem later because they're not a good fit. They're too much of an entrepreneur for a franchise relationship. There's questions that prospective franchisees should always ask themselves if they are first-time franchisees and are going to experience the relationship for the first time. Big question: will you be happy being in business for yourself but not by yourself? Will you be happy and satisfied simply executing somebody else's operating system that you did not design yourself? With some brands, that means, executing the operating system very precisely. Will you be happy not being in total control, where the franchisor might make a decision that's not a contractual kind of thing, but it's a strategic thing you don't agree with? Are you going to be able to deal with that? Will you be happy signing up, for 10 years or more? And what about being a part of a system with other franchisees? You will be joining a group of people that you may or may not get along with, but one of the values of being in a franchise system is that you have other people doing the same business that you are, and you can learn from one another. But does that appeal to you, that kind of thing, or not? People who are truly independent entrepreneurs, who are burning with a flaming desire to be on their own, will often have a hard time looking in the mirror and answering those questions honestly.
Then who does make a great franchisee in general? I mean, what makes a franchisee even better?
Yeah, well, it starts with asking those very same questions and coming up perhaps with different answers. I, for one, and most people that get into franchising on the franchisee side, think it's a great advantage to be in business for yourself, but not by yourself. And they realize there's an advantage to not having to take the risk to invent a product or a service from scratch, where there's an even higher risk, of failure. So they see that as a benefit. And, they also like the fact that they will be doing the same business with tens or dozens or hundreds of other people around the country or around the world who are executing the same operating system. And a lot of shared best practices are going to be a result of that. So folks that really understand the relationship, understand that it is a long-term relationship, make very good franchisees and are often very successful.
So what you're saying then, that it's the job of a good franchisor to try and then identify prospective franchisees who will be a good fit for franchising first before considering your specific brand.
Yeah, and again, it's a balance, because you obviously want and need to bring new franchisees into your system. So there's a strong motivation to do that. But that franchise fee or that commission won't look so good 2 or 3 years down the road if you've got an unhappy franchisee. And if you have a bad fit, most people are surprised about this. You could have a franchisee who owns a unit or multiple units that are very profitable, that have surpassed his financial expectations, and a particular franchisee could still be unhappy and causing trouble for you because they're not a good fit. They never really should have done it in the first place. They cannot be happy in your system.
Assuming that a prospective franchisee is a good fit for franchising in general, what else goes into being a good fit for your specific brand?
Well, I always recommend and always wanted to really understand why the prospective franchisee was interested in being a franchisee in my system. Could they really explain that? Did they have a good reason to do it, or did they just find us online or through a broker or whatever? And if they didn't buy our franchise, they were going to buy something totally different in some other industry. That usually didn't impress me. So I wanted a franchisee, a prospective franchisee, to come in and say, here's why I'm interested in this system. I understand your mission, I understand your vision. I buy into it, want to be a part of it. I'm excited about it, and can explain in some detail why I want to be a franchisee, in your system. So they need to buy into the mission and vision. I've worked with Huntington Learning Centers here in the United States today, and many of their franchisees are very mission driven to really fill in an important gap in education in the United States. And many of those franchisees are very successful because they are so mission driven. When I found Valpak many years ago, I had sold radio advertising in a local market for several years, and I knew that small businesses needed advertising, but they were really interested in attribution. We didn't use that term back in the day, but measuring results was another way to put it. Valpak filled in that gap for me because it was coupons. I could measure the results for my advertisers. When I found Fast Signs, when I became a multi-unit franchisee of Fast Signs, after having dealt with small business people for several years, I knew what a hard time they were having back in those days getting signs made or banners printed. Usually in somebody's garage, it would take 3 weeks and cost too much. And Fast Signs was creating a way for small businesses to get high quality signs and lettering overnight. And so I could understand the need. I bought into the vision, and as a result bought into the franchise opportunity. Interestingly enough, that franchisor, the founder of that company, was a fellow Valpak franchisee who we had met and were friends with. And when he started Fast Signs, we already knew each other, and he already understood why there was a need. And of course, the rest is history with both of those companies. Fast Signs now with hundreds of locations, around the world.
What about culture? Where does that fit in?
Well, that's an interesting one, and it can be, a little bit squishy. But I usually start with two major differences in franchisor culture. Really have to do with at what stage the franchise, is in. How old is it? How long has it been around? Is it a startup? Is it emerging? There needs to be a first and second franchisee of every system. But is it an emerging? Do they have, 30, 40, 50 units, still pretty new? Is it the kind of system where a franchisee can pick up the phone and talk to the founder? He's got their cell phone number, call them at home, that kind of thing. Very informal culture where franchisors and franchisees are evolving the system very quickly because it's an emerging stage. Very different culture in a 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old franchise brand that has already grown to scale, that may have a lot of bureaucracy involved, a lot of layers, and that requires a different kind of franchisee who will be happy and want to be a part of a system like that. So that goes into part of the fit. Another one is really how does the organization act? How do the people act? I've had occasion to attend several different conferences or franchisor conventions in the last few years for companies that I'm working with. And I noticed there are completely different ways in which conventions and conferences are conducted. Some of them are like any other button-down corporate meeting, all very formal with presentations, basically work. Then you have others that may feel more like the United Nations, and with a number of different cultures represented within the franchisee group. Certainly true with global franchisors, but to a certain extent with others here in the States as well. And then there's the third kind, which is more like Animal House. And if you remember Animal House, it was, a fraternity. And, that was kind of the way we began. And we actually called our annual conference Coupon U, and it was actually modeled after Animal House. But, there would be people that would come into a culture like that and be completely shocked and say, how could business be going on here? How could this company be successful when all it seems to do, they just want to have fun? So some people love that. So again, I think it really comes down to finding the right fit with a company that you believe in the mission, vision, you're comfortable joining at whatever stage of evolution the brand is in. And then are you going to like the people at the home office, and are you going to like your fellow franchisees? Do you share kind of a culture? Will you have fun? Will you cooperate? Will there be trust and cooperation? And all of that goes into this two-way, very important decision that needs to be made before the dotted line is signed on and the check is written. And that's the franchisor to the greatest extent possible, and the franchisee to the greatest extent possible, making sure that there is a good fit and they're going to make a good decision that's going to make both parties happy for many years into the future.
Still an exciting industry, and it will get stronger. And as you mentioned before, people are very, very resilient and strong. If they want to find out more, though, and let me think now, who would they call? Not Ghostbusters, but they would call Joe Bourdow. How would they contact you, Joe?
PremierFranchiseAdvisors.com. It's
fantastic.
a way to reach us anytime.
Now, I can actually hear not hear, I can imagine that burger you threw on the barbecue. It's sort of resembling the coals that are cooking it at the moment. So maybe take two on the barbecue with a good Chardonnay.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to it. The sun is setting here on the west coast of Florida. So we'll lose our lights shortly. It's probably time to sign off.
It is indeed. Joe Bourdow, thank you very much.
Great.
Well, it's that time of the week which I sort of tremble in my shoes just a little bit. Kirk Clyatt is no longer in Vegas, well, just for this week. He's walking the streets of where, Kirk?
I'm walking the streets of Philadelphia, actually West Philadelphia, just a little bit west of the University City area. And if I knew how to, off the top of my head, switch the camera, we could show you some more. But you kind of can still get the general idea. These are some houses that are probably a little more than 100 years old, and they're huge back when people had 6-bedroom houses. So it is a gentrifying area. It was kind of a working class area of Philadelphia for a long time, but now we're seeing some very interesting juxtapositions of housing, where you'll have a very old house next to one that's modern right next to it. It's like, whoa, how does these two things go together? But it's a very interesting, fascinating, dynamic city. And yes, very, very democratic, that's for sure.
Because you were once a sort of almost a minor celeb there. You were the weatherman of Philly.
Yeah. for 3 years I was on TV here. I was one of the B-list celebrities, maybe C-list. Well, they couldn't get somebody from the A-list or the B-list here in Philadelphia. They'd call me. Let me see if I can just flip the camera here for you. If I can figure this out here to do this. Where's that? Where's the camera flip?
This is just, this is the on the fly. Now tell me about the flight. Speaking on the fly, how was the flight?
It was pretty interesting. Here, I just want to show you something here in town. There are these signs, thousands of them, thousands that say, vote, make a plan, vote, make a plan. And in the city, all there are Biden-Harris signs everywhere. There are thousands of them up. But it's interesting because when you go into the suburbs, there you start to see the Trump signs. Here it's a little bent right there, but you see another one there, and then another one across the street. There are these, I cannot even imagine how many of these vote, make a plan signs that the city has put up. I think it's the city that's put up. And on every other phone pole is a Biden-Harris sign. And here comes a Philadelphia trash truck. And they do something very interesting here in Philadelphia. They certainly don't have to worry about that where you are in Brisbane. But in the winter, when it snows, to supplement the snowplows, they actually put a snowplow blade on the front of the trash trucks, and they go down the streets here in Philadelphia. Actually, just a beautiful day-to-day temperature in the low 20s. Leaves ought to be starting to change. And you were asking a little bit about the flight. Actually, if you could just imagine there wasn't a pandemic, it was actually much more pleasant to fly. And the reason for that is there just weren't the crowds. The plane about half full. I had a connection in Dallas. So I had no one in my row from Las Vegas to Dallas, and then no one in my row again from Dallas here to Philadelphia. So it's kind of, you almost feel like you're giving the steerage provisions from the third class cabin. There you are. Here's another phone pole. Same thing from across the street. There are more of them. The steerage cabins, because you come on the plane, they give you a baggie. And in that baggie, you've got a handy wipe. And they still have trolleys there. You may be able to see it in the distance here, which is kind of cool here in West Philly, where it's a trolley. It's not a bus. So that's kind of neat. But they give you a baggie. And in the baggie, as I mentioned, the wipe, a bottle of water, and a cracker. So that is what you get. But all in all, it was actually a very pleasant experience. So the plane was early. So we'll see how it is going back. But I tell you, it is much, much tougher to, get flights than it was because there's simply not as many of them. It used to be American Airlines, which has their hub here in Philadelphia, one of their hubs. They used to have, 3 or 4 nonstops a day to Vegas. Now they have one.
Wow.
So coming up here on Baltimore Avenue, which is one of the main drags here. And look at this. They're everywhere. It's kind of remarkable. And here you get an idea of what we've got going on. You got the Philadelphia paramedics out here. So they're interesting.
But they're there for you because they know that you're talking about the elections, and they know they saw last week's episode and they thought, oh my God, he needs paramedics.
Well, I might after the vice presidential debate, which by the time you watch this, the vice presidential debate will be over, but it's going to be getting started here in a couple of hours. So if you can't hear me, it's obviously because of some street musicians here. And most people, right now I'm not because I'm talking to you, but most people, even on the streets, they wear masks, which is pretty interesting. Tell you what, I'll run across the street here on Baltimore Avenue and notice on the road, trolley tracks. There are not that many cities. Well, now they're starting to be more and more, but Philadelphia is one of the few cities that never gave up their trolleys. So there you go, Philadelphia Fire Department in action there for you. And this is Baltimore Avenue, but it was very pleasant to get here. Philadelphia is a great city with the exception of maybe December, January, February, March. So 8 months of the year, it's a pretty nice place to go. And I have no idea what's going on with the extremely loud local entertainment across the street.
No, we organise that for you, you see.
Oh, did you?
We have our reach is great. We can go to all parts of the studio. Hey, tell me you after we spoke last week, we know what happened with Donald.
Amazing.
Now he's out again. Who do you think is the more stronger at the moment, and who is the weaker? I mean, is it Trump or Biden?
You know what's fascinating that we've got going on here is we've got, there you are, another one of those signs, is interesting, just a little sidebar going by here. Pennsylvania is one of only 2 states in the country where the state controls the alcohol sales. So the state, that's a state liquor store there.
Wow.
So they get all the money from the booze here in this state. But what's fascinating is today a Rasmussen poll came out, and Rasmussen is usually very conservative. It's the one that Trump often tweets about, saying, 50% approval rating from Rasmussen. It's so good. It's so wonderful. Today, it showed him 12 points behind Joe Biden. So clearly the debate performance and the hospitalization and some of his just crazy actions where he's saying, he's breaking off discussions with the Democrats on the stimulus, and then he's starting it back, and then he's got it for the airlines, and then he wants one stimulus check. He's just all over the place. And multiple reports today here that he's, one day back in the White House and is actually in the Oval Office. I mean, my gosh, they have basically carved that place out because so many people in the White House have gotten COVID. And you have the situation with the justice, the judge that has been appointed a justice. This is interesting, used to be a bank, and now it's a food co-op. So that's an interesting place. But you've got a situation there where, I mean, how does she feel? I guess the desire and the power of wanting to be on the Supreme Court overrules the fact that during the time that she was appointed, that has become a super spreader event. And just what's so bizarre that we've got going on here is that the White House is not doing much to cooperate with D.C. to trace all these cases down. Here's kind of cool. This is a look at one of the SEPTA streetcars that we got going on.
Yeah, that's a tram. That's a tram.
It's a streetcar. You better know how to parallel park. That's all I can say. But
you do. That's also someone from our camp. They've heard you talk about Donald in such a bad way.
But it's amazing. And it's interesting because you look at voting. Voting here in Pennsylvania is actually much more difficult than it is in Nevada. Nevada makes it considerably easier to vote. For instance, Nevada sends a ballot to every registered voter in the state. Here you have to request one. They don't have as many early voting sites and locations. In fact, when I lived here, you could only actually vote on election day. So it's just fascinating to see the contrast and the difference in states as far as their election laws go.
What about the movements of both candidates? We saw what happened to Trump. And Joe's movements, he's sort of retarded in his movements anyway because of his age and other ailments. But for a 95-year-old, he certainly moves around. But do you think they should be? You think both Trump and Joe Biden should be restricted in where they can go?
Well, we have a situation here where you have the administration that's currently in power advocates that people could do basically whatever they want. And here's a good example. Those folks there, they're wearing their mask. And just a little look at the old school architecture here in town. That dates back to the latter part of the 19th century. Most of these buildings, these stone buildings like the stone church that you see here, this would be, let me get across the street here. This would be architecture that would probably be, I would say, ran the red line. That would be probably about 1880, 1882. So make it out of stone. It stays for a long period of time. But of course, you've got Joe Biden saying right now that if Trump still tests positive, that they are, here you go, I was off by a little bit, 1905 for that church.
Were you there for the opening?
Yes, I was there. You've seen the pictures. But right now you have Biden saying that, hey, we should not have a debate if Trump still tests positive for COVID. But what they could do, and what there's a lot of speculation on, is that's pretty cool. A light down there on the ground. That's neat. Anyway, what they're speculating now is they could have them in two different locations. I mean, they did that for the last Kennedy-Nixon debate back in 1960. So if they could do it 60 years ago with the candidates in different cities and even the moderator in a different city, they should be able to pull it off this time. But it's going to be fascinating to see if there is another Trump-Biden debate. And of course, by the time you watch this, you will know what happened in the vice presidential debate, which is happening, of course, in Salt Lake City. And big discussions there because the Democrat, Kamala Harris, they wanted the plastic partition, the plexiglass partition, while the Republicans, Mike Pence, no, didn't want it. And they've spread out even further. So this will be an interesting event.
What's the feeling in Philly at the moment towards, I mean, you mentioned it's a Democratic city, although out in the burbs, they've got the leaning towards maybe the Donald. Do you think that is that an indication of what's happening throughout the US, that generally the major cities, they're in favour of generally the Democrats, and then as you get out in the suburbs or out into the country or into the farmland, do you think they sort of swing towards the Republicans?
Well, I think we're seeing more and more in the hinterlands, or what is affectionately known here in Pennsylvania as Pennsyltucky, that is starting to go for Biden. I just wanted to mention before you elaborate further on that, this is kind of interesting. Of course, we've talked before about Breonna Taylor. Here's a little street memorial to Breonna Taylor. And if you do come to Philadelphia, not so much here on Baltimore Avenue, but they have some of the most amazing murals. This is really a city of murals that they have, and it is really remarkable. No, Pennsylvania, the central portion of the state, will still probably vote for Trump. Of course, this was one of the 3 key states that put Trump in the White House. It was just a couple of thousand votes that did it for him. It was the 3 states being Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So what we've got going on here is just a swing of literally fewer people than you would fit in the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Grounds, can decide the election as it did back in 2016. It certainly can here in Pennsylvania. And that's why there is such an effort by the Democrats, by the Biden campaign, to get out the vote here in Philadelphia. Because if they have a strong voter turnout here in Philadelphia, and to a lesser extent across the state in Western Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, that will overwhelm the rural vote. So they're hoping for at least maybe a 40% Democrat vote in rural Pennsylvania, and that will overwhelm the strong urban vote will overwhelm the vote from the rural part of the state. You can see a little bit in the distance there, if you look, some of the skyscrapers of Center City. Now, if you ever come to Philadelphia, do not call it downtown. Philadelphia does not have a downtown. It's got Center City.
Kirk Clyatt, walking the streets of Philadelphia. What I should have had was some Rocky Balboa music, but I can't find any Rocky music for you, so we'll just have to imagine it. Kirk, thank you very much. See you in Vegas next week.
I'll be there, hopefully. If the plane makes it, I'll be there, and I'll look forward to it always. But if you get a chance, if the world ever returns to a semi-normal condition, come see Philadelphia. It really is a great American city, but probably not a good idea to visit next year or two, because it's going to take that long for us to get our act together here in the U.S.
And that's it for BNAP Today, Thursday, October the 8th, 2020. Be safe, be kind. I'm Mike Ryan.